Morning. Hello.
I am Antonio Savorelli. I'm a Drupal developer at Digital Loom. And I think we're seeing too much screen. Let me see if I can. Nope. Where would we be without it? All right, so, and I'm here to talk about Sass and the art of awesome theme development. This talk is going to be mostly about Sass, a little less about theming specifically, and because you can use Sass without using Drupal, and you can use Sass, but I think a front-end developer Sass is an absolutely irreplaceable tool to the full power of CSS, and to make your life easier and to make the lives of other people who are going to be working on your projects or who are working on your project with you easier as well. So who here knows what, or actually, let me reverse this. Who here doesn't know what Sass is at all? Okay. Who knows what Sass is but has never used it? Okay. All right. Who uses it every day? So, well, good. So you can correct me whenever you feel I'm wrong. No, that's good. That's good because this is categorized as an intermediate session. While in fact, I'm going to be foundations as well. So if I see you're getting bored and all, droopy-eyed, then I will just move on. But in any case, for everybody, Sass means syntactically awesome style sheets. It provides an extension to CSS, which means that it basically provides a way to keep your selectors and style sheets organized. Using partial files, nested syntax, and all this kind of goodness. And also it adds a pre-processing and scripting layer to CSS using this language, the scripting language that's called Sass script, which is not as powerful as it can be, but provides some pretty cool stuff that will really make your life a lot more. Sometimes it is fun, sometimes it's not. Sass is a piece of software that and it can run in three main different ways: as a command line tool, as a standalone Ruby module, which I sort of know what it is, but not entirely certain. I mean, I've installed it that way, but that's not how I run it. How I do run it is as a plugin for my automation tool of choice, which, as you can guess, is actually CodeKit. But if you use Gulp or Grunt, you can also run Sass tools. I use CodeKit. CodeKit is a full-fledged app, which is available only for the Mac. So that's what I normally use. That's where a couple of my examples are going to be from. And but Gulp and Grunt very well, and they allow you to really the best use of it. So take a peek at CodeKit to show you. I can show you what the main settings for Sass can be on CodeKit. Oh, now all of a sudden, if I can find it, here it is. So Sass can run with a few different options enabled. There's output style, which can be nested, expanded, compact, or compressed. Can you all see that? because I'm working with Drupal, I want my output CSS to be readable, so I normally use the expanded nest output style, because then I want to be able, if something goes wrong, I want to be able to go into my CSS and find the proper code without my mind. But of course, if you're if you're working on like websites, you can also ask CodeKit in this case, or your other automation tool of choice to compress your CSS directly so that it takes up less space. You can have debug information printed out directly in your style sheets. And one of the things that I like the most is you can select the decimal precision that you want, because Sass script specifically can do a lot of calculations for you. You'll see what my favorite function is in a bit, but I won't get ahead of myself. And here you can select how precise your decimals are going to be. I like to be precise, apparently, and so I usually run Sass with 10 digits of decimal precision. And you can have other options as well. You can have Sass create a source map for your CSS. So when you go into your browser's developer tools, instead of seeing is in style.css, you will be able to see the selector is actually in style.scss. So you can go back to your source file and see where the problem or the selector you're trying to fix is, rather than having to in your source code everything is. Options as well. Decide to run auto prefixer after compiling your CSS. That's pretty cool, because then you don't have to remember which properties have already been standardized and which are still need to be prefixed with vendor prefixes, and that's it saves you a lot of time. It's a time saver. And other options as well. You can decide where in your code the compiled files are going to live, and all that kind of stuff. This is a very small part of what CodeKit does. Of course, I won't talk about the rest because this is only about Sass. But everything that you see here in this screen, you can also set up if you're using a command line tool. You can feed these sort of parameters to Sass through other tools as well. So let's go back to CodeKit. How to get started with Sass? It's very easy, because so Sass actually has two different syntax styles. An older one, that's Sass proper, which was all YAML-y and perfect indentations. Otherwise, it would go crazy. The one I prefer, and that everybody I assume prefers, is the newer syntax, which is actually called SCSS. The acronym probably means sassy CSS. I am not totally sure on that, but in any case, it's a lot of consonants. And SCSS is actually a superset of CSS, which means that any valid CSS is valid Sass. And if you know CSS, you also know some Sass. So you can right away just simply by changing the file extension from CSS to SCSS. And Sass will figure it out and will output the right code. Actually, one of the cool things that I normally do when I find myself with very messy style sheets, the first thing I do is run the CSS through Sass, because then it will indent everything properly. It will just make that code more legible off the bat. It's really cool. Yes, it is time for example one. So let me see if I can pull it up correctly. This is an example of what Sass can do for you. I mentioned nested styles before. So be valid CSS, because there's stuff inside that first set of curly braces that would never appear in CSS. So if you have, say, this ID main and paragraphs within, one paragraph within the main selector, but then you give styles to, that's CSS. But then you also have special cases in which you have a class, a highlight class within that paragraph style. Instead of retype everything again, you just nest it within the original selector. So that's indented. Doesn't need to be indented, but that's actually more for your own. And what Sass does is take that code and produce the CSS that you would expect. This is nothing too fancy because there's nothing very special about this except for the nesting of the syntax. There will be something else, because the heart of Sass is actually Sass script, which allows you to use variables, functions, and the special thing that is called a mixin. So variables are variables. They allow you to store values and manipulate them. Functions allow you to do calculations and return values that can be reused, that can actually be used in code. And mixins are actually the special thing they're very flexible. They allow you to output chunks of CSS code, and you can well, mix and match. Really, you can use functions within. You can call functions from within mixins. Mixins can be entire selector blocks, only partial selector blocks. They accept arguments, so that we'll see some of that. So they're a very fancy way to produce CSS without. So you have very similar styles across your website. Instead of having to retype everything every time, you create a mixin, sort of like this. This is, I mean, this is for the sake of space. It's very not awesome, really. But you create a mixin, you declare what it's going to do. In this case, it's going to return this property color by calling that other function up there, awesome shade, on the original color variable that you declared. Well, it would be kind of useless to have this, but there's a lot more that you can do with this. Variables come in different data types. These are pretty straightforward. You have numbers, you have strings of text, and the fun thing is that they can be with or without quotes, depending on the context. Sometimes you will find yourself needing double quotes, sometimes you will find yourself needing single quotes. But a lot of times I don't find myself needing quotes at all. Even if I'm just passing a string to a function or a mixin, sometimes you don't need quotes, and that's fine. That's great. It's kind of liberating from PHP. So data types, you can manipulate colors as CSS keywords. Sass knows what it is, and so if you want to manipulate that color using a color function, blue as being blue, or hexadecimal values, or RGB or RGBA values as well. Valid color data. That's all. All of those are valid examples of color data type. You have booleans and you have null values as well. Booleans being, I'm just saying, just in case. I don't. And more data types that are very useful, the examples that I will show you later, are lists of values which can or which may or may not be separated by commas. And you will see these, you will recognize these as possible values for properties. Like the first one could be a value for the margin property, and the second one is a value for the font family property. And having them, and having Sass able to manipulate these lists with or without commas is very important. I will not get into the depths of list manipulation, but the Sass documentation is very it's very succinct, but it's quite clear still, and it's very useful when you want to figure out what to do with these kinds of maps. Are basically sort of like the equivalent of what arrays are in PHP. So they allow you to map one and pasted from the Sass documentation. So they do say from one value to another. Of course, it's a key value pair, and you can do whatever you would normally do with an array in PHP. Almost all of the things. It's a little bit less straightforward how to manipulate maps, but you can use them pretty much like you would use an array in PHP. So, for examples. One is example 2. So here we have, I wish we're a little lower, but in any case, we have variables. We are setting a color, 2 colors actually, one as a hexadecimal and the other one as RGB. Doing it in pretty much the same code that I showed you before. Yes, I just replaced the color value with a variable, and the background color value in on the highlight class with proper variable. And, or rather, Sass produces that code, and Sass also knows that can be replaced with the keyword red. Fewer characters, not a lot. You know, you don't save a lot of space, but you save some. Example 3. Is everything clear so far? Who use Sass, and for those who don't, good. Some very few examples of default functions. Of course, you wouldn't set all those color properties on the same paragraph. It's just to show you what happens. So these are color manipulation. One is lighten, for example, or actually no. The first one we see is adjust color. So we have is just a dark shade of gray, but we can adjust it by adding. Sorry about that. By adding some amount of expressed in as a decimal value. And so, as you can see, where that is used, color 2 is used on line 10. It's produced on the line, let's say line 4. As you can see, the has become, we imagine, a dark shade of blue, more or less. I wish I had HTML examples. I would be jumping around so much that it would be a little awkward, and so you have to imagine these pretty colors here. And yeah, and so we have other functions as well. These are also other color manipulation functions. RGBA, yes, RGBA is present in CSS, but you have to give it 4 values, 3 for color and 1 for opacity. But it's also one of the default functions for color manipulation. And in this case, you can 2 values, 1 for the full color and 1 for the opacity. And it's still going to be produced correctly as a valid RGBA CSS value. Saturate, that's, you know, if you want to saturate that color, you can see that actually on the color spectrum to be a little bit more vivid. You can also desaturate and do calculations with negative numbers to better manipulate that. Yes.
Can you go back to the line 5 where you're what that blue 150 things do?
Yeah. So we had a grade. On line, I have it here. So on line 4 we have a shade of gray. We add blue to that. lighten the amount of, to increase the amount of blue that there is in that shade, bring it closer to you know, only by 150, 150 out of 255. And so that shade of blue, that shade of gray is actually becoming a shade of blue in line, following line when you call adjust color.
Gotcha. So the blue variable is just kind of built in?
Oh, right. So I'm skipping a whole set of instructions on how to use the adjust color function, but the adjust color function takes a bunch of arguments. It can take red, it takes them all in a row, but Sass works so that if you know what the variable is called within the function, in this case, there is one of the, well, not the variable, sorry. If you know what the argument is called, function, call it directly, and it's going to skip. You know, the other ones will have defaults probably as null or something like that. And so if you just want to change the blue value, you just call blue like that, because the function, the signature of the function says, you know, red, you know, $sign green, and then but I could show this kind of stuff in the end in the documentation. But this is pretty handy, because if you just want to change that one value, you don't have to call. And most, I think, all of Sass functions work that way, and the ones you declare yourself can also work that way, which is pretty handy too. My favorite function is percentage, because I mean, sometimes you have to calculate what the percentage equivalent of 7/16 is. It's not even such an ugly number, but say you want to do something like this because one day you're just crazy and you just want to have crazy amount of columns in your. That's the number, and see, that's where my decimal precision comes in. It's useful. I find it useful. So yes, percentage is great. I use it all the time. It's sometimes I find myself using it for stuff like 1/4. I know it's 25%, but it just works better in my mind. Like if I know that everything is set that way, and if I want to change a layout from going from from being like a 4-column, let's say column, let's call them columns, from a 4-column grid to a 5-column grid, I just have to go in and change the proper numbers there, and I don't have to think twice about that. Or, you know, to 179 columns. There's that too. So this should be example 3, and I promised also example 4, which is here. Custom functions. This, again, it's not a super useful function, but it shows you a bunch of things you can do with functions. You can call functions to manipulate colors, in this case, colors. But you can also work with the arguments that you set for that function and include control statements within your function. There's also the @else if you wrote, but in this case, since we're returning a value, we don't need that. That's the same as it is in PHP, so no news there. So if you want to make this blue a transparent blue, let me go back one sec. If you want to make this, creating an opaque blue, you just, as I did in the paragraph on line 14, you just call the function as is on any color. In this case, I called it on a. But if you do want to make it transparent, with an extra argument of to the transparency, and I put in a 0.7 value, the CSS is going to look like. In the first case, it's going to be an opaque color. In the second case, it's going to be an RGBA value. this is a very simple function, but you can have very long and complex functions, which are going to drive you insane because at some point you'll forget you've ever written them. So they're useful, but use them with caution. Well, apparently my slides are saying that I also have example 5, so what that is. Yes, Mixins. Now we're getting into the depths of, we have 15 minutes left. Yeah, that should be okay. In this example, we see a few of the things that we've already seen. So we are declaring a color variable at the top of our style sheet. Any variable that's declared at the root of your style of your Sass file is going to be global by default, which means that it's going to be usable directly within mixins and functions without to explicitly tell Sass that that's a global variable. I think it's fairly intuitive. It's very useful. But if you declare a variable within any of these blocks of code, whether a mixin or a function or a media query, that variable is going to be scoped within that block of code only. So the Sass color there, I call it Sass color not because I was running out of ideas, but that's because that's the Sass official, and so which we can't see, but we saw it in my slides before. But that Sass color is going to be valid only within the mixin itself, and which makes it pretty. It makes it possible for that not to overwrite anything that's declared. If you had the same variable name somewhere else, at least it wouldn't override it. Have so many things going on in this mixin, really. One new is at content, which I'll show you in just a little bit. The rest is basically just CSS properties that may or may not have variables, previously declared variables as values, except for the line height, for the $ line height variable, which is actually something that's passed to the mixin. So you can do that, and we'll see it down here. As you can see in this block of code, I'm including the header mixin as is. So the line height for the heading styles, for the heading selectors, is going to be the default for that. Was it clear up there on line 5? But down here in this other style in this other selector that I have, I actually give it a line height of 2.8 because I'm insane, apparently, and so that is going to appear here. But as you can see, everything else is exactly the same in the heading selectors, which basically means that we've saved ourselves a lot of time not repeating these styles, doing all the work. Other stuff that's going on. Actually, one of the things that I want to, because it will introduce my next topic, as you can see, if you have other header, which includes exactly the same styles as the H1 to H6 before, that code is going to be produced as CSS separately from other declarations. So as you can see, you save yourself a lot of time. With mixins, you save yourself a lot of time typing stuff, but then the code produced by mixins, because all these styles get repeated. So with that said, well, example 6 is coming up. I have a solution for that. I thought there were some more. No. Well, I gave myself away. Anyway, doesn't matter. It's one of those days. Example 6 is coming up, so I'll show you example 6. If example 5 made any sense. Okay. One possible solution to the code bloat that unfortunately is inevitable in Mixins is to use placeholder selectors. So one fun thing about one of the many fun things about Sass is that you can extend an existing property, whether it's an HTML element or an ID or a class. You can extend it using this guy here. You can call it using @extend. But Sass also allows you to create what's called a placeholder selector, which is a fake selector by a percentage sign, which we have any corresponding element in HTML. So you don't have to say, oh, this is by definition an H1, and so I have to create an H1 with that style and then extend it. Selector. You can just say, oh, I want my header to be all this stuff here, line 5 to 22, but only when I want to use it and not have it in the CSS if I never use it. And this is pretty useful when you want to create template of styles that people can come in and apply, having them bloat up your code uselessly. All this code, you can do exactly this. You can go into the H1 to H6 selector, extend percentage header, and what happens here is in CSS as expected. But this is also what happens if you the percentage header selector up there. In a different selector like this one, the pseudo header class, it appears up here with the heading or elements, and we can the difference that makes. This is the same exact code except for the fact that I was using an argument in the Mixin in this example, but this is basically the same exact code. Except, as you can see, 43 lines, 38 lines, pretty much the same stuff, except that the CSS produced here using Mixins is a lot longer and a lot less compact than the CSS produced in example here. So maybe Sass is broken because we can't have it both ways. We can't have the flexibility of Mixins and compactness of headers. Yes.
This may be a little bit of a question, but in your own workflow, do you use this method or
Actually, I use the next method that I'm going to show right now, which is actually a way to really get the best of both methods put together. You use both, and the code is going to be a little complex. Even for me, every time I go what I did to make it happen, I'm like, I think I understand what I did. Mostly I copied it from a guy on Elisapart, but I will also give you that link. So the solution is to use so there's, okay. I need to do this because so example 7, which is coming up, is super dry, like this guy. It's large enough. Good. So super dry as in DRY. Don't repeat yourself, which is a maxim that should be in coding all the time. But of course, sometimes for whatever reason we can't follow that. But because fortunately there is a way to dry up your Sass to have the best of Mixins, best of placeholder selectors. Let's see how it's done. So, by the way, example 7 also shows you, I mentioned partial style sheets or partial files earlier, and this is what they look like. They're just Sass files whose name, if you can read it, the name of this file is underscore mixins, yes, .scss. Normally, if you have an SCSS file that does not start with an underscore, that's going to be compiled into CSS directly as is. Files whose names start with an underscore are not going to be compiled directly, but they can be called from other style sheets with an import statement like this. And you don't need to add the underscore, and you don't need to add the extension at the end. You do need to add the path if it's not in the same directory, but that's very easy. So right now with this file, what this example file is doing is importing whatever is in my Mixins template or partial or well. In here does a lot of things, and I need to do this because it's not wrapping. I can't wrap, so anyway, so this Mixin here is doing a lot of things, but it's one of the things that it's doing is creating a map, the types that we saw before, and this is the hint that it's creating a map about of data, a map of all possible placeholders that it itself is creating. All this, actually, what I do is create another mixin that calls the previous mixin, but that's because I'm complicated. I don't need to go into the depths of this, also because we have 3 minutes left, or 5. Anyway, so what this does is create a map of all the possible placeholder selectors that it creates. You don't create the percentage something selectors. It does it all by itself, by assigning them a unique ID, in code anywhere. All you see in code is whenever you call this dry mixin up at the bottom. Kind of technique would not work within. I found partial solutions that allow you to use it in media queries as well. Again, can't go into the depths of this, but we can chat more about this. And I can point you to the article that originated this code, but the media queries is actually something I came up with. So, so what I'm doing here, I am is to create the header mixin as before, but instead of outputting the code, the CSS or the Sass directly, first run it through the dry mixin. So I'm actually including the dry mixin, giving it a name here, code here, and this from page 6, I call it as a mixin. And when I call it from pseudo header, I call it as a mixin. And the result, the same as calling a placeholder selector on this. This is not too useful because in this case, I've basically just replaced a simple placeholder selector with that, black magic there that I did. But it becomes useful. But it becomes useful when you have a lot of complex code, some of which needs to be output, while some other needs to be output according to variables or to different, dynamic values that you might want to add to your code. And frankly, at this point, whenever I'm working on a site, even sites that are not, didn't originally make, one of the first things that I do is take these 2 mixins, put it in the code somewhere, and anytime I would use for a placeholder selector, use this technique because it works, and I won't have to go in and change a bunch of things later when I realize that I actually do need that using variables, I do need the code to be more compact. This is really cool.
There's a mixin that generates placeholders like mixin that generates a placeholder.
It's a mixin that generates placeholders without you having to do anything about it. It remembers what they are and where they are. Sass runs, it's going to do it over again, all behind the scenes. Of course, it adds a few milliseconds in processing time, but it's really cool. I've tested it both with Gulp and CodeKit. I really notice it. It just, the moment you switch your screen to the browser, it's already. So I have no more time. That's the question, right? It has everything to do with Drupal. I'm gonna go off on a rant here because I think Drupal could use more Sass. I know there's been a lot of push, a lot of themes use Sass. I'm not sure what the situation in core is. I would love for that to be a thing. I would love for all the code for all the CSS that Drupal provides at any level, Sass source. That's as far as I'll go because of time constraints. But I do have some recommendations here. Take control of all your style sheets, and this is a Drupal-related recommendation. Override stuff. Create base themes that, and it's even easier in Drupal 8 because it's such an easy, it provides us with such a much easier way to override any sort of style sheets. I always had more trouble in Drupal 7, Drupal 8. It just happens very easily. Take control of everything. If you have the patience, one day, if I had the patience and the time, I would go in and just replace everything across the system with style sheets that I can control at all times. But I guess I'm not obsessive enough to actually do that because I haven't done it yet. One day. Keep your templates separate. So anything that provides mixins, functions, even the occasional placeholder selector, keep it separate from the code that's actually going to produce CSS. If you mix and match, you're going to have style sheets with, especially if you have separate style sheets that call the same templates, make sure that they call templates, make sure that they call only templates that contain not actually production or code that will be to CSS. Otherwise, you end up with the same style sheets or with the same styles over and over again. And if you're using a version control system, which you should, commit everything except for the .sass cache directory, because that's I'm not doing it. It's the directory itself is just nuts. And also never hack compiled CSS files because they're gonna come back and bite you in the ass because you know the next time you modify. This is a rookie mistake that I made. The next time they're really going to be overwritten anyway. So this is as far as I can go with this. There are some references, how to install Sass in different systems. Sass for Web Designers by Dan Cederholm, which is great, came out a few years ago. It's one of the very thin book apart books. It's just about Sass. To begin using Sass is there. My source for the dry technique is here on a list apart. And there's some, and then at the end there's Jonathan Snook's reference on Smack, which I haven't talked about, so I don't even know why it's there. But you know, it's one of the principles by which Drupal 8 style sheets in your themes, and so it's important. I think it's important to go in and see what that's all about, because that's something that we're gonna daily. We're supposed to be using daily in any case. And that's my email address. Thanks for listening to me babbling for 40 minutes. Feel free to stop me later.